Good afternoon. We are going to go ahead and start our meeting so that we can get to our program today. So welcome, everybody. And I see more people coming in. So welcome to, I can't believe it's already April that we are at our April lunch. But thank you so much for taking time out, especially on a beautiful day, to come and join us and not only see each other, but to come and hear our presentation. So welcome. My name is Cindy Gwelly, for those of you who don't know me. I am president this year of AOI, and I am excited to talk to you about a few things that we have coming up, as well as a few things that we have previously done. So a recap of our March meeting, in which we had our board members, Bill Brown and Sherry Sewell, who talked about the two AOIs and how they were connected both on a personal and organizational level in DC, as well as the resolution that we passed recognizing both of those organizations. All of that is in our current newsletter. The program is on YouTube as well as on the AOI website, if you want to go back and revisit that. So unless there are any objections, I will go ahead and have that put into evidence, so to speak, as a record of our March meeting. Any objections to that? So we'll
Why did it get covered in the Washington Post?
I believe, as I think Bill has also been talking about lately, the decrease of local history in the Washington Post. So the loss of John Kelly and the buyouts that people took, and the decrease even at WAMU and DC IST that shut down. So all of that, unfortunately, has left us with very, very few outlets. If anybody knows of any other outlets that are covering local history, please let us know. We are now moving some of that online. So. To the Washington Post? Yes. I will actually put that to do something of that. I do think that is incredibly important. As an organization, we absolutely should. We'll keep our fingers crossed whether that actually goes anywhere. If Jeff Bezos has if anybody is at any events with Jeff Bezos, go tell him about this too. We should. If you have a connection, if anybody has a connection, we will invite him to speak. Yeah, and we'll go to his house. I don't know if he has a house here. Does he have a house here? Jeff Bezos? Okay. Well, in the meantime, I think what we are doing is we are moving some of our information online. So definitely check out our website and the YouTube channel, and that's why we want to keep records of this as a history organization. But also, we are now on all sorts of social media. So we are on LinkedIn, we are on Instagram, we are on Threads. So you can always find us on there, and we will try to not only post our own information, but any other information that might be of interest to the DC community. Andrew. We have our documents are at the Kiplinger Library at the DC History Center. So all of our records are there. And they're being kept, and we make a yearly donation to the library as a thank you for keeping our records, and you can search. They are searchable records. So all of our meetings, that's why I say that at the beginning, so all of our meetings, all of the records of our meetings are kept at Kiplinger. As far back and as much of our history as we have. So as far back as 1865, whatever we have going back that far, are all kept at Kiplinger. So we are trying to keep a record. I don't know if I had a question over there. So keep that in mind. If you do need information about us, that we are keeping records, and also that if you're looking for information about us, we are on social media of all sorts. We're keeping our name, the AOI name. All you have to do is look that up. You might find some Japanese anime with the same name, but keep going, and you will see AOI of DC. You learn when you start Googling and we are there. So if you have any announcements, if any events that you want to promote, please send them my way, and I am happy to put them on our social media to the maybe 3 or 4 people that follow us. But we will start building. The more that we post, the more we will build on there. So please keep us in mind for that. I'm going to pass along now to Carolyn for our treasurer's report and our membership report.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have 3 new members in attendance today. So I'd like to introduce them. First, Philip Collins, who joined in January, but Philip Collins expressed interest in joining, and today he officially joined. So Philip, if you could introduce yourself.
He's going to.
I'm a retired D.C. attorney, and I'm researching whether we have a right to have vote for members of Congress with Maryland under old law that exists.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
welcome.
Can everybody hear that? No. Okay.
Okay, do it one more
I
time.
wasn't sure because it was very.
Hold it up to
You guys were right into it like you're a '70s singer.
I'm a retired D.C. attorney, and I'm researching whether when we took over Maryland law that included the Declaration of Rights, which in paragraph 5 said that people ought to have the right of suffrage, which would mean we would vote with Maryland for members of the Congress.
Interesting.
And
Fascinating.
I meant to mention that Martha Jewett invited Phil.
Thank you.
Joe McCall. Where's Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe McCall. I've lived in D.C. for the past 26 years, originally from North Carolina, and I manage a family office for extended members of my family. And other than that, I have always been a huge history buff, and I had been interested in the organization for a while. First, I had to qualify, and then after that, COVID came along, and so someone mentioned this again to me, and I saw the topics that were being presented over the next few months after that, and I found them to be very interesting, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. Welcome.
We're glad you joined. And John Lockwood.
Who's our speaker for today?
Our speaker. He just joined today.
I will be introducing you as well.
Hey.
Thank you. Welcome. Go ahead.
No, I was going to move that we accept their application to join.
Yeah. So we will take a vote to accept our new members. We'll do it as a voice vote. So all saying yes, yays,
Yeah.
yays. Any nays? Because we're a friendly group. We got it. Thank you
right.
all
Better not,
very
better
much
not.
for coming and for joining.
Thank you. Do we have any visitors?
I'm the member, Nancy Hoffer, and this is Carolyn Baker, and we know each other through the Daughters of Union Veterans of the Civil War.
I said, welcome.
Welcome.
Hello, I'm Juliet Smith, and I have a friend from a class at church, Camille Hazur, and her aunt, Lucy, whom I just met.
Thank you. Welcome. Any other visitors? I think that's it.
I think that's it. Well, thank you. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for and I have one more personal announcement, and I think instead of maybe a song, maybe we do a hearty once over. But I would like to acknowledge Pat Batondo's birthday today. So maybe as a group, it's a big happy birthday. You certainly don't want me to sing with a mic in front of me, but we wish you one big 1, 2, 3 happy birthday. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday! All right. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't want to be the only one singing.
What? And I was just saying, and I don't at the mic. So we're going to let you, Marcy, sing and maybe do a stage production after, because I think you're still, we still need your theatricality coming through. That was from last time. Okay, one chorus, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Pat. Happy birthday to you. All right. All right, well, and best wishes for a fun day. Thanks for joining us on your birthday. One thing that we did last week on last Friday was the DC or the 5th. It was April 5th, the DC Historical Conference that took place at Martin Luther King Jr. Library. And AOI had a table at the networking event, as did some other of our members have tables from different organizations that they represented. So we had about 1,000 people apparently that attended the conference. It is a free conference that happens every year, and they do not tape it, but you still can look online if you're interested in any of the conference topics to follow up with people on that. So we had a nice representation there, and had a number of people stop by and not surprisingly had never heard of AOI, so we were able to tell them a little bit about us. And hopefully also make some connections so that maybe we have some collaborations in the future with some of the other organizations that were represented there. We have coming up this Sunday, Collecting DC History Day. You will all get an email about that later today, just to remind you of that. This is at the Hyrick House Garden on Sunday from 12 to 3. This is where you can take a picture of things that you have in your house and you're trying to figure out what to do with them to preserve them forevermore and become part of DC history. So if you have photographs, trophies, dishware, artwork, organizational papers from organizations that you've been involved with, family scrapbooks and diaries and letters, things that you might have that you want to make sure stay in the right hands and are available to future generations and future generations of researchers to give that fullness of DC history and the people's version of DC history instead of just looking at the federal government, which so many archives really do. So bring a picture, come to the garden. You can there are 13 different archives that are going to be represented there, and they can help tell you where might be the best place for whatever item that you do have. If you don't have anything, stop by and say hello. Yes, question? This Sunday, April 21st, this Sunday, from 12 to 3, and it should be a nice day, a little bit cooler, but still sunny. So it should be a nice day to go hang out if you have not been to the Hyrick House before or been to the garden in a while. It's a nice place and a nice time to do so. And the event is free and open to the public. So swing by if you're in the area and get a chance to do that. It's at Hyrick House, which is in DuPont Circle. It's the Brewmaster's Castle. So the Hyrick House Museum. That's there. Yes. Oh, yeah, maybe, yes. And I think just to send some positive thoughts out, we have one of our board members, who is also the director of Hyrick House Museum, Kim Bender, was hit by a car about 2 weeks ago. And she suffered some decently serious injuries, and that she is home recovering for several weeks. So some nice thoughts, if you have a moment, that go out to her. It seems like she will make a full recovery, but she is dealing with some internal injuries and broken bones. So it is a serious hit by the car. Andrea?
Throw out 2 quickie events.
Sure.
There are 2 book events this Sunday also. Everything's going on Sunday. Sunday from 11 to 4 is the Kensington Day of the Book, which is all local authors of all flavors. I'll be there. And also on Sunday is the brand new first year Tombs and Tomes book festival that's also all local authors that's being hosted by Congressional Cemetery. And they're both 11 to 4-ish.
And that is at Congressional Cemetery.
The Tombs and Tomes is at Congressional
Is actually at the
Cemetery.
cemetery.
Kensington Day of the Book is on Howard Avenue.
Okay. And I'm going to give you some more for that day. So you have a full weekend. And it's supposed to be a nice weekend, so you can get to all of them. There is the annual, it's actually the 31st annual Georgetown House Tour is on Saturday. Henry Kissinger's home is on the list this year, for better, for worse. So do what you will, with that. And that is it is $65 day of. You can show up at St. John's Church in Georgetown, and that includes all of the houses that are on the tour, as well as a tea that is sponsored by a number of area restaurants and caterers, including Georgetown Cupcake this year. That is on Saturday. Actually, I'm wrong about how many years that is. It's since 1931, not the 31st year of it. So that's been going on. That's been going on for a while. On Sunday, there's also a Formula One racing car that is going to be driving around the mall. So either avoid that or go to it, whichever one sounds more appealing. They will be closing off streets, and it will be zooming around. I think it's sponsored by Red Bull, so I'm assuming zooming around very quickly along the mall. The following weekend, the 26th to the 28th, there is a French market in Georgetown. That is a 21st annual, and that is an open-air market with all sorts of things to buy, things to do, restaurants that are going to be there. Not coincidentally, that same Saturday, which is the 27th, there's a DC Chocolate Festival at the French Embassy on Reservoir Road. You can both make and eat chocolate, apparently there. And I did just read that there is a cereal bar, a restaurant that opened up in Springfield, Virginia, who have as their owners two people, one who grew up in DC, one who went to Howard, and they have created the first ever DC-based cereal called Capital Crunch cereal. I think that's what it is, yes. Capital Crunch cereal. And that is going to be available this summer, and you can online buy a pre-order a box for $40. So, of cereal, but I believe the logo is based on the DC flag. It has Frederick Douglass on the back somehow, so it apparently is a strawberry and vanilla flavored crunch cereal. But we get, as DC, we get our first cereal coming out this year. So take a look for it. Our next lunch is going to be May 16th. Here again, and our speaker is going to be Kim Prothero-Williams, who is an architectural historian. She works with the DC Preservation Office, and her book that she's talking about is The Hidden Alleyways of DC: A History. She previously has spoken to AOI about her book, The Farms and Estates of DC, if you remember, a few years back. So she will have some for sale. She'll have some of her books here for sale on that date. And that should be a really good program as well. So keep that in mind. I will turn it over to Nelson for our trivia questions.
Okay, the first trivia question, the rules are that if you've won a trivia question in recent times, hold off and let some other people have guesses first, but we'll open it up to everybody eventually. And don't just shout out your answers, but raise your hand to be recognized. We'll try that method. The first question is, name the president who wanted to move the White House to what is now Rock Creek Park. So that's a lot of presidents, I'll grant you. So we got to narrow it down. This was a president that served after 1860. A lot of people, guests that I've talked to around said, oh, Truman. Well, you know, Truman had troubles with the White House. It was falling down, and he lived across the street for 4 years while they renovated it. But it wasn't Truman. Pardon? No, that's a good guess, though. But
Yeah, a guess over here.
Was it Grant?
Grant? Well, you're getting close. Very close. We'll give it to you. Who was the president before Grant?
Johnson, of course.
Johnson. And Johnson couldn't get Congress to directly approve it, so he assigned it to the Corps of Engineers, which he could direct directly. He said, I want to move the White House. Find some sites, give me a design, and he was all ready to go. And of course, in those days, a president was in until March 4th, till the new Congress came in. So he almost got it through. But Grant came in and he said, no way, we're not going to move the White House. But was that close?
Where exactly did he want them?
Well, 3 sites they had. I haven't been able to identify them. They're probably down in the archives. I've contacted the archives. They have a lot of records from that period of the Corps of Engineers. So it's probably in the archives and the plans themselves. And so there's more research to be done. I don't know that anybody's done any. I've contacted the White House Historical Association about this, and they weren't too interested for some reason. They thought somebody might revive this proposal.
I heard a story, and now it's beginning to make sense, that at one time there was talk about moving it to where the soldiers' home is.
Meridian Hill Park.
Meridian Hill Park.
Could be. So you're a winner. Okay. Second question is, about 40 years ago, a bipartisan group in Congress said, it's time to allow the District of Columbia to have 2 statues in the Capitol, like the states. Well, it took 40 years, but we finally were authorized to have 2 statues in the Capitol of the United States, as those states were the only exception. Name the 2 statues that have been there. They were both put in 2022, so they've been there for, what, three years now. Who do we have in the Capitol now? I'll give you a clue. They're both men, of course.
I would say Banneker. Is that one of them?
Well, that's a good play. He could be there. No, he didn't make it.
If it's good, it's not good enough. Huh?
But, well, Douglas is there, yes.
Well, Banneker should be.
Well, I agree. I can't argue about that. Do I have another? I will give it to you. You got half of it. Pierre Lafont. You win. Now, wait a minute. There's a group in the Senate of bipartisan women, Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, who are proposing that states and the District of Columbia allow a 3rd statue to be in, because women are not very well represented, of course. The idea is to give women a chance to get in there. And so that might happen. And so think about that. If we had a chance, what woman would we like to have in the Capitol? Think about it. I wanted to mention about the event at the Hyrick Mansion, bringing things into fruit. I've been collecting D.C. license plates for years. The earliest one I have is 1949, and I have a lot of years after that. I don't have anything earlier. Does anybody here have a license plate before 1949? If you do, show up, because I'm going to ask them where should I give these? Probably the D.C. History Center, maybe, but we'll see. But it's interesting. For 20 years, on the license plate, we just had D.C. There was a number, and at the bottom it said D.C., and the dates were at the top. Didn't say Washington, D.C., didn't say the nation's capital, didn't say anything, just D, period, C, period. Simple. And so I'm going to bring some of my license plates in and have them look at them and evaluate them. Also, I've given out some cards. Several months ago, we had a trivia question about the woman that convinced the British not to burn down what was then the Bank of the Metropolis, which was across the street from the Treasury building. They had just burned the Treasury building and were moving on the bank to burn that. And a woman came out of Mrs. Sweeney and said, no, the bank does not own the building. It is rented to the bank by a poor widow woman. This was a total story. And they spared the building. The bank gave her a $100 reward. We don't know if the bank put her up to it or what it was, but they gave her $100, which was a lot of money in 1814. So I handed out some of these cards. When I did this question a few months ago, people asked me more about it. So I have cards. If anybody didn't get one, I have some extra cards from that period. Thank you.
Harriet Tubman would be a good woman.
Pardon?
Harriet Tubman.
Oh. Well, think about that. Maybe we should have a candidate.
In mind, can you tell them that you're donating can you tell them that you're donating your collection to the DC History Center?
Oh yes. Well, I worked on the Hill. Some of you know for 25 years. I worked on the Home Rule bill on the House side. When it was going through, I was assigned from the Library of Congress to work with the House side writing it. And when the committee was abolished in 1995, its records were put out in the hallway. And I was no longer with the committee, but the staff called me up here and said, Ryman, come up here, what's going on? And I went up and they said, well, the archives doesn't want them. And so I, at that time, was able to drive my car into the garage. I couldn't do that today. And took my 4 loads of the records to my house. And they're there now. And eventually I'm making some arrangements to have them go to the DC History Center. Because it's very interesting, because for 150 years, the government of the District of Columbia was really run out of the House District of Columbia Committee. It was the government here in many respects. And it was progressive in many ways. You wouldn't think in recent years it had Macmillan and all of that opposing home rule. But it really had a very interesting history. And it will be preserved now at the DC History Center. Glad to hear that.
Why wouldn't it be the DC Archives?
Pardon?
Why not the DC Archives?
I don't know. There was no DC Archives. I've been negotiating this for over a year. There is really no DC Archives yet. I mean, they're working on it. But I don't want to pass on and have this in my garage and it wind up in a dumpster. Put it that way. Okay. Prize over here. Where was the other one? There. Okay, right next. Okay.
So, in the spirit of what we're trying to do in terms of preserving DC history. So thank you, Nelson, for making sure that those are taken care of as well, being at the DC History Center for it. Well, I would like to now introduce our speaker for today, and as you can see the cover of his book, he is going to be speaking on the Siege of Washington. And books, in case you have not seen that on the email that went out, books are available at Amazon, Abe.com, and Barnes & Noble. And if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, it is a great read, and it's a great book, and I highly recommend it. And We know it's going to be good because Mr. Lockwood knows of what he speaks. He is not only a DC native who went to Wilson High School, at least one representative, a couple of representatives in the House here of Wilson High School, grew up in Northwest, obviously, and got a master's degree from College Park, which served him well in his years at the National Park Service. So he served for about over 30 years as a historian at the National Park Service of the memorials and monuments and of Washington, D.C. itself. He has written over 200 articles, many of them involving D.C. history. And this specifically, the only full-length book on the Civil War. Am I correct? The only full-length book on the Civil War. He and his brother Charles, who he co-wrote the book with, who has sadly passed away after the book was published, not only grew up in D.C., but learned to love history in D.C., both with their parents going to visit battlefields, but also exploring the city on the weekends, and on both the Capitol, when you could run through the Capitol, I believe, without any hesitation. As well as absorbing, as I think many of us have, just the history of the city itself by being here. This, I think, was fascinating that they were able to find a story, a little piece of DC history that had never been told before. And I believe you found it by reading, when you were reading Winston Churchill's A History of the English-Speaking People, and found a reference to this time period, but that had not been covered before. So I will let Mr. Lockwood tell you more about it, but we thank you for coming, and welcome, Mr. Lockwood. Pass this on to you. It should be on. That.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And your clicker.
Okay, I just want to mention one thing about this picture you see up here of my book. Just a moment. If you look very carefully here, you can see the unfinished stump of the Washington Monument in the background. The government, the people building it simply ran out of money. They relied on public donations, which didn't work very well. And so for 25 years, it sat there like a stump until the government took it over and finished it in the 1880s. And Mark Twain remarked that when they finally finished it, George Washington would be the grandfather of his country. Okay. Okay, now my book covers the first 12 days of the American Civil War. During this time, Washington, D.C. was almost defenseless, and if the South had been quicker, they could have grabbed it and maybe ended the war right there. But fortunately, reinforcements did arrive in the nick of time for Washington, D.C. Now, the siege began when the war began with the firing upon Fort Sumter in South Carolina, Charleston Harbor. Now that was on, the bombardment began April 12, 1861. Okay, this is better? Okay, the bombardment began April 12, 1861, and the fort was surrendered April 13, and they had a surrender ceremony April 14. Now on the very next day, April 15, Abraham Lincoln, the new president, sent out a call by telegraph to send 75,000 soldiers to Washington, D.C. to serve for 90 days. He didn't say they were going to go anywhere else, just Washington, D.C. alone. He knew the peril that the city was in. At this time, Washington, D.C. was downright primitive, to be honest. They had about 1,500 soldiers based at the Marine barracks, and the arsenal at Greenleaf Point. And that was all. There were citizen militias, but they were of doubtful reliability. There was a lot of secessionist feeling among many people in D.C., just like there was in Maryland nearby. So anyway, Lincoln also did something else which I found rather interesting. He told Vice President Hannibal Hamlin to go to New York City and stay there until further notice. If Lincoln was captured or killed, it would be up to Hannibal Hamlin to keep the government going. Also, something else happened at this time, what people considered an ill omen for the Union. On April 4, a comet was seen in the night sky and stayed there for quite some time. And comets, to the superstitious, are considered omens of bad luck. There's always something bad going on somewhere in the world, so you can always blame that on a comet. It was discovered by a man named Mark Thatcher in New York City, and they call it Thatcher's Comet. This shows you how dimly lit our cities were back then with gaslight, because with today's light pollution, you couldn't see a comet in the night sky. And Washington, D.C. had only 50,000 people, compared to Baltimore, which had 200,000. And it had no water system. The only paved road was Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House to the Capitol. And the gas lighting system, they turned off the Washington Gas Light Company, which still we have today, of course. Back then, during a full moon, they would turn it off. They figured that the full moon was enough to light the city. They did this even if it was a cloudy night, they would do it. So anyway, there's Lincoln, 75,000 soldiers on the way. Just to show how primitive our government was, he had no telegraph service of his own to send out the message. He had to get a messenger boy and give him the paper, and the messenger boy would walk over to the nearest privately owned post office and wait in line, and then they would send out the message. Okay, then. Now, the three states that were most ready were Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts. Their three governors had long since foreseen what was about to come and got the regiments ready and ready to go. The first people to come here were from Pennsylvania, the first Pennsylvania Volunteers. Now they came by train from Harrisburg, which I believe is the capital of Pennsylvania, isn't it? Yeah, from Harrisburg, and they landed in Baltimore on the 18th of April. Now, Baltimore was full of secessionist feeling, and also a perfect place for an ambush. See, back then, the train did not run straight through Baltimore. It would stop at one edge of Baltimore at the President's Station. Then you'd have to walk or march or ride 1.5 miles to the other edge of Baltimore to the Camden Station and take that into Washington, D.C. Like a lot of cities, Baltimore didn't want trains chuffing their way through the heart of the city. And I myself have walked that. It's 1.5 miles. I myself have walked it alongside the harbor, and it's a perfect place for an ambush. So 900 Pennsylvanians, and there they were walking along, the people screaming at them, throwing rocks at them. There's one Pennsylvanian in particular they hated. His name was Nicholas Biddle. Now, Nicholas Biddle, I don't know if any of you have heard of him. Anybody? No? Okay. Nicholas Biddle, he was a black man, and he was in uniform too, and he really aroused the ire of the crowd. Let's see if I can get his picture up here in just a minute. Here we are. That is Nicholas Biddle afterwards. And one rock hit him on the head. He started bleeding on his forehead, and the other men had to scoop him up and get him out of there. They did manage to get to Camden Station, And the train tracks, the mob was getting ready to sabotage the train tracks, but fortunately, they managed to get out of there in time and arrive in Washington, D.C., April 18, 1861. Now, naturally, there were no barracks or tents ready for them, of course. The government had really allowed the military to go rot during the years of President Buchanan, Lincoln's predecessor. Some people think this was done on purpose, by the way, so that the North, if it came to a war, would be handicapped. For example, the Army was scattered all over the western states, 16,000 of them, very few of them in the East where they were needed right now. And the Navy was scattered off in the Pacific, also far away, instead of right here in the Atlantic where they were needed right now. So what they had to do was they would camp out in the U.S. Capitol. Lincoln was not going to convene the Capitol until July 4, 1861, so the Capitol was empty. So the men camped out in the House of Representatives. Plenty of room for them, and on the floor of the spectators' gallery, the officers had the offices, of course, that was the first contingent to reach Washington. Now the men, like the people who came after them, found it rather humorous to be in Congress. And they did things to make fun of Congress. Some of them would make big, long, windy speeches full of total nonsense, and their comrades would boo at them and hiss and whistle and throw paper planes at them. But of course, they also did serious things as well, getting maneuvering and practicing. But they had a lot of fun as well. And the proprietors in charge of the Capitol were a little bit worried, but they would mess up the place. They had slabs of Army bacon with them, and they didn't want the grease spots all over the marble or anything. And there were only 6 bathtubs in the entire Capitol. If you can see where that led. What they did was the next people to arrive, the next day, the next soldiers to arrive, 6th Massachusetts, they dammed the Tiber River north of the Capitol. Back then it was a tributary of the Potomac, and it was above ground, so they dammed it up and created a big pond for everybody to bathe in. And I don't know how many toilets there were, I haven't been able to find that out, but yes, I'm afraid there were messes. But they did the best they could with what they had. Now the next contingent to arrive was the 6th Massachusetts. Now while the Pennsylvanians were being stoned at on the 18th, the 6th Massachusetts were marching through Broadway, New York, in a big parade in their honor on the 18th. And people were throwing confetti, and waving handkerchiefs, and women would go up and people would give them gifts of money and tobacco. There was one soldier in particular, a New Yorker came up to him and said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And the soldier held up his boots, and one boot had a big hole in it. And he said, my ancestor was plowing in the field of Concord when the call came out to join because the British had fired at us at Lexington. I got the same call in the same field, one from my ancestor was doing, and I did not hesitate either. He was the ancestor of one of the original Revolutionary soldiers. And so needless to say, the man bought a new pair of boots. Incidentally, there were some other Revolutionary soldiers in these Massachusetts soldiers next day. They were descendants of the people who had been called up at Paul Revere. I'll get that in just a minute, though, with Colonel Jones, but let's just stick for the moment with the Broadway parade. Excuse me. So anyway, there they were, parading along, and they took up a residence for the night in the New York City hotels, big fancy hotels. The big rich men who ran the hotels put soldiers up in them, and even waited on them, and had the staff wait on them, and rich society ladies and people who waited on the soldiers. So they had a grand old time with the best food available and a nice place to sleep. Now they were supposed to sleep all night, but at 1 a.m. in the morning, new orders came in. Get up, get out, and get to the train right away. We're leaving for Boston tonight, for New York. Sorry, for Washington, D.C. tonight. And there was a reason for that. The higher-ups figured if we go to Baltimore early, we'll arrive in the early hours of the morning, and the mob will get asleep. We can march through to the next train and get out of there before the mob catches on. They never got a chance to try it out, though, because when they got to the train, some more cars were added to that train. Some more Pennsylvanians were waiting to catch the train also, and also the band of the 6th Massachusetts had 24 more people. It had several more heavy cars to carry, and the train slowed down and took a lot longer to reach Baltimore. They arrived in Baltimore at 10 a.m., and by then the mob was ready and awake and ready to go. So now you had another mob confrontation, and this one was a lot worse than the previous day. This took place on April 19, 10 a.m., and some of the mobs had weapons, and the 6 Massachusetts people, they had weapons and uniforms, and there was a lot of firing back and forth. 4 soldiers were killed, 1 was beaten to death, and so they fired into the crowd also. I don't know what the crowd's casualties were. Anyway.
Turn the mic a little more toward you.
Like this?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know how many casualties there were among the crowd, but there were 4 soldiers killed. And they managed to make their way to the Camden station. At this point, they had to leave the 6 Massachusetts had to leave the others behind. The owners of the train said that they're getting ready to destroy the tracks. You better get out of here before the tracks are destroyed, or you have to march all the way to Washington. And they need soldiers right now. So reluctantly, Colonel Jones and the 6th Massachusetts Regiment took the trains and left, and the bands were left behind, and the Pennsylvanians were left behind also. It was a heartbreaking thing to do, but they really had no choice. Now the mob chased after the music band up the streets, all 24 of them. And at that point, a man stepped out from nowhere and said, "Follow me." And the band followed him to a nearby house. And they got in the house, and a woman at the front door locked the door after them. One of the soldiers was hit by a rock, but she got him inside and locked the door on the mob. So the band was saved. Now, the woman in charge of the house, as you may have guessed, was in fact her name was Anne Manley, and she was the local madam. Yep. And that was her brothel. So anyway, but they managed to get the soldiers out of there. They had a lot of civilian clothes in the house from previous customers, probably. And they dressed up in civilian clothes, and when the coast was clear, they got out of there and pretended to be civilians and got back to Pennsylvania. Now, for the Pennsylvanians, a few of them were locked up without food and water for 2 days. They were escorted with a jeering crowd to the Pennsylvania border and got out of there. The rest of the Pennsylvanians managed to get out on their own and got to Pennsylvania. So, the 6th Massachusetts arrived in Washington, D.C. It took an hour and a half to cover the 38 miles. And the people in Washington were there waiting for them. And so some of them were rather battered up and beaten up. So they did what they could for them. There were no bandages available just yet, but people took out their handkerchiefs and things and bandaged them up as well as they could. In the crowd was a young woman whose name some of you may know. Her name was Clara Barton. No? Okay, she bandaged up the soldiers as well as she could. And she was, at this time, a clerk in the government. She worked in the patent office. And she got a certain amount of harassment. She was the only woman working there, and she was an abolitionist as well. So she got a certain amount of harassment from some of the men. But she worked there all the same, and she rather liked it. Anyway, she would have made a good soldier herself. Her family had taught her how to shoot and how to ride a horse. And she practiced the shooting galleries in Washington, D.C., including one on the grounds of the unfinished Washington Monument. And That's Clara Barton. Now, in succeeding days, she and a few other women would go visit the 6 Massachusetts, who were camped out in the U.S. Senate. Once again, the Congress serving as a place to lodge the soldiers, and they too made fun of the speakers and tossed paper airplanes and all the rest of it. And she and some other women, including her sister, brought some goodies to the men, some fruit and veggies, and some newspapers and mail and stuff that the men really wanted. At one point, she brought a newspaper she'd gotten from Massachusetts, the Worcester Spy, from Worcester, Massachusetts. I might also add that some of the Massachusetts soldiers recognized her because they had been with some of her students when she was a teacher up there. Yeah. Anyway, there they were, so camped out in the Senate, and there she was bringing them goodies, and they wanted her to read the newspaper to them, so she did, out loud. She sat down in the vice president's chair, and of course, the Colonel Jones, he slept in the vice president's chair at nighttime. I should explain that the vice president presides over the U.S. Senate. It's one of the few things that he or she gets to do. Although they seldom do it, you pass it on to somebody else, a vice president pro tempore of the Senate. Whether Kamala Harris has done it or not, I don't know. But she sat, anyway, there's Clara Barton sitting down in the vice president's chair, reading to them the newspaper out loud, including everything, including the patent office advertisements. So, this is going on on the 18th. And then on the 19th, when the soldiers were marching and firing into the mob. On the 19th, there was another group of soldiers marching through after the Massachusetts people had gone to Washington. On the 19th, back in New York again, there were 2 more parades for the 7th New York and the 8th Massachusetts. 7th New York and 8th Massachusetts. And they had people New York in the morning, for New York in the morning, and the 8th Massachusetts in the afternoon. And they got lots of waving of handkerchiefs and confetti and everything like that. And they made their way. They made their way down to Baltimore after the 6th Massachusetts. The 7th New York, by the way, was led by a man named Robert Gould Shaw. Some of you may have heard of Robert Gould Shaw. The Shaw neighborhood in Washington, D.C. is named after him. And some of you may have seen the movie Glory, in which Robert Gould Shaw appeared when he tried unsuccessfully with the black unit to try and take Fort Wagner. That's right, yeah. So Robert Gould Shaw, another famous name, during the siege of Washington. And they got down to the Capitol. And once again, they had a hole up in the Capitol. The 6th in New York, they camped out in the House of Representatives along with the Pennsylvanians. It must have been pretty cramped in there with two full regiments in there. And the 8th Massachusetts, they camped out in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. Now, the Pennsylvanians and the 6th Massachusetts came to Washington by rail. But the New Yorkers and the 8th Massachusetts couldn't do that. They had to come by ship because the Baltimoreans had destroyed the track inside Baltimore, and also they had burned the bridges north of Baltimore, so you couldn't use the tracks anymore. So what the New York regiment did, and the 8th Massachusetts, they bypassed Baltimore completely by ship. Now let me see if I can show the map here. Just a minute. Oh, well, here we are. Here's the 6th Massachusetts fighting the Baltimore mob. That's an illustration in the book. Let's see if I can find the map. Okay, and that is the soldiers inside the U.S. Capitol at Washington. And here we are. Okay, the 8th Massachusetts and the 6th, 7th New York bypassed Baltimore completely and stopped in Annapolis. And they came together about the same, they met together at almost the same time. And they worked together in a lot of things. In fact, those two regiments became close friends to each other during the early days of the war. Now the question was how to get from there to Annapolis Junction, and from Annapolis Junction down to Washington, D.C. See, you leave Baltimore completely behind. Well, the mob had taken away most of the trains, but there was one single train in a big shed. It was locked, and Colonel, the general in charge, General Benjamin Butler, he said to the Massachusetts men who had a lot of engineers and mechanics, "Boys, can you get that thing open?" And they said, "Let us at it, General." And he said, "Let me see you try." And they got it open all right. There was a train engine inside that they could use. It had been vandalized and partially broken up by the mob, of course, but the Massachusetts men had a lot of talented mechanics who were able to put it back together. One of them was Charles Homans, who helped build the train in the first place. That was handy. And he has some of his graffiti was still on the train. So they got the train in working order and found some cars. And let me just a minute. Yes, here we are. They made their way to Washington. This whole thing took a few days. They didn't arrive on the 19th. It took a few days, Washington a few days later. Here they are marching through the countryside. Some of them went by train, and some of them marched on foot. The ones on foot and train had to stop periodically because the mob had thoroughly sabotaged the tracks. They would take the sidings and toss them into a nearby field. In one case, they tossed the siding into a stream, and a man had to dive down and find it, and they put that back. They also took sidings off the side of train tracks and just repaired the train tracks as long as they went. It took a while, too. They had one man with them. His name was Andrew Carnegie. There's another famous name that you may have heard of. He was a telegraph operator at this time. Okay? And he helped repair the telegraph line also, which led into Washington. The mob had also cut off the telegraph line, so Washington didn't know what was happening up north. But they repaired the telegraph line as they went along, and Andrew Carnegie was there helping out. At one point, he came across a trap laid by the secessionists. Several telegraph wires had been buried deep in the earth together, and he pulled on them, and one came back and slapped him in the face and left a scar which he had the rest of his life. But he kept working, and made their way to Annapolis Junction. Okay, and they had some shots fired at them along the way, but they found in the car they didn't have a battle or anything. What they were hoping was that there would be train service still at Annapolis Junction, which they could use to go into Washington rather than walk all the way there. It turned out there was a train service available. The government had sent what soldiers they could spare. They sent them to the Washington train station, and the soldiers told the engineers, if you have any secessionist ideas or try any tricks, we'll shoot you. So the train engineers tried no tricks, but took the trains up to Annapolis Junction. And there was one coming in as the New Yorkers and the Massachusetts men arrived. So they were able to get to Washington the rest of the way by train. The New Yorkers, they took the first train to Washington and arrived in the morning. And the Massachusetts men, they took the next train and arrived the next day. The New Yorkers arrived April 25, the 12th day of the siege. And the people were mighty glad to see them too. They, like I said, camped out in the House of Representatives. They marched around town for a while, including to the White House. And they then marched back to the Capitol. I might also mention that, I forgot to mention earlier, Abraham Lincoln visited each set of soldiers when they visited the Capitol. They arrived at night, or set up shop in the night, and he would visit them, each group, in each house. He made special care to pay attention to Nicholas Biddle. He paid special attention on his visit at that time as well. And he greeted the New Yorkers, of course, as well, and the 8th Massachusetts as well. And the 8th Massachusetts was in the rotunda of the Capitol. Let's see if I can find let's see if we have a picture of that. Just a moment, please. No, I guess not. I thought I had one, but I guess I don't. The Capitol Dome was unfinished at that time, so the rotunda was in the open air. So if it rained, it would rain on the soldiers. Yeah. And the New Yorkers were sort of upper class types, many of them, in New York City. And the regiment had a long-standing history in New York. The Massachusetts men were just mechanics, farmers, engineers, people of that sort. Two separate social classes, you might say. But nonetheless, they had grown very close by this time. And the New Yorkers went out and bought a lot of food and had a big feast arranged for the Massachusetts men in the rotunda. And made speeches to each other about, oh, you helped us so much. Oh, we couldn't have done it without you, and so on and so on. They were very close. I suppose they were separated when they were set off to separate duties, but for a while they were very close. And they brought everything, beer and cheese and bread and meat, much better than hardtack and salt pork. I've tried hardtack myself, by the way. You can still get it from those who serve as Civil War reenactors. Not just uniforms, but salt pork and hardtack. That stuff is as hard as a rock. It could come in a rectangular plate, like a piece of bread, or in a large lump. I tried to lump it once, left it in a glass of water overnight, and took it out the following morning, and it was just as hard as ever. So that feast was very much appreciated. And the people of Washington did not forget their gratitude to these soldiers. 50 years later, in April 1911, April 28, 1911, the original New Yorkers, those who are still alive, and some young New Yorkers as well, marched through Washington once again. Big parade, huzzah, hooray, handkerchief waving, and gifts of presents and everything. And so the New Yorkers had not been forgotten. The 8th Massachusetts were not forgotten either. They had a big feast for themselves in 1911, April. I forget the exact date. It was in New York. And Colonel Edward F. Jones was there. He was blind by this time, but somebody read the speech for him. And he said that those who've gone before us, they're waiting for us in heaven when it's our turn to rejoin our old comrades in arms. He said, we're old now, and it won't be long before we rejoin them. On the quick, as he phrased it. So the people, they were remembered. It wasn't just a case of Manassas. There was a lot going on before Manassas. And this book helps show that there. There are some other soldiers that came in back in 1861. Some of the soldiers quickly arrived in Washington. There were some soldiers from Massachusetts. They took up shop in the patent office, where Claire Barton was, of course. And the soldiers after them also took up shop in the patent office. 3-level bunks. Mm-hmm. I think that's about it, actually, if anybody has any questions. I'll do my best. No doubt I'll think of things I wanted to say after I leave.
Well, I do have the mic, so if anybody has any questions, perfect timing to come on over. Oh, I see one over here. You got it.
About 40 minutes, that's about right. About what I thought.
On? Are we on? 1, 2, 3.
Okay, somebody had their hand up?
Pretend like you're Cher. Talk right into the microphone.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Thank you for writing this book. I bought it early on. I'm so sorry Charles is gone. I seem to remember that in some of the notes, maybe on the liner notes, you asked for other people to send you their information that was not included because y'all realized it was not a definitive book. But it was a first attempt to cover this period that nobody has covered adequately up to this point. Did people actually send you things?
Well, I must admit, what you say is news to me, really.
Look at your liner notes of the cover again.
Yeah, I guess better to tell, maybe read the prologue or something. Nobody sent us anything. I first found out about this place from Gary Scott. Where Gary Scott found out about the book, I do not know. But he phoned me up and asked me to speak here, and that's what I've done. I've also become a member, like as you saw earlier, of course. Let me just think for a moment if there's anything else I want to mention. Oh yes, of course. I forgot. There's one thing more about the comet. I forgot to quote Shakespeare. Shakespeare mentioned comets twice in his writings as omens of ill luck. In Henry VI, Part 1, the very opening scene, there's a man who's complaining about the comets. He's saying, he's almost shaking his fist. He says, "Shake your crystal tresses, you comets." And in Julius Caesar is about to go to the Forum, where of course he gets assassinated, and his wife Calpurnia tries to tell him not to go there. He goes anyway, of course. There's been all sorts of strange astronomical phenomena in the nighttime sky above Rome, and she looks upon that as a bad omen, and she says, and I think this is a direct quote, "When beggars die, no comets are seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes." And there's also one astronomical phenomenon that people considered a good omen. When the New Yorkers were coming down by ship, they were near the Potomac River, and they could have gone up the Potomac River to Washington directly, but they decided not to. It was a good place for an ambush. There was no government ship waiting for them to escort them, nothing like that. They might get sunk. So they went back to Annapolis, like I said. So did the 8th Massachusetts. They skipped the Potomac and went back to Annapolis. Anyway, while they were outside the Potomac, one night they saw an astronomical phenomenon. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a ring around the moon at night, like ice crystals and things like that. Well, they saw 3 rings around the moon that time. It was a bit late in the year for ice crystals, so I don't know where the moon rings came from. But one was reddish, one was red, one was white, one was blue. No fooling. They really saw that. And so that was a good omen for them.
I think we have a question here.
Yeah. Hi, Bill Rice. What is your thoughts about Reveille in Washington, Margaret Leach's very well-known book about the Civil War in Washington?
That's right. 2 books actually helped me get started. Cindy mentioned Winston Churchill's History of the English-Speaking Peoples. There's a brief reference there, just a paragraph really, about how Washington found itself dangerously isolated, quote, unquote. And Reveille in Washington, of course, is about Washington, D.C. during the entire Civil War. The first chapter does mention a little bit about the first few days. That's where this map comes from, by the way.
You mentioned that it was isolated. Do you have a sense of the percentage of people within Washington that were Southern sympathizers at this point in the war?
Well, I would say there were quite a lot. There were big crowds to greet the returning soldiers, so there must have been some loyalists, but there were plenty of secessionists. When Simon Cameron, Lincoln's Secretary of War, came to the Department of War, he found out that the 3 top officials there were secessionists. They were still working in the department. And a lot of people, a lot of Washingtonians, they went south, some of them. I think there may have been a change of heart among some of the Marylanders, however. You had the secessionist mob in Baltimore, right? But then a few years later, in 1864, when the war was still going on, the people of Maryland voted in October and November a plebiscite or referendum to abolish slavery in Maryland while the war was still going on. So there must have been a change of mind among some of them at least. Incidentally, Missouri did the same thing, another slave state, in January 1865. And West Virginia entered as a loyal state. And Washington, D.C. abolished slavery, of course, by compensation, which we commemorated just a few days ago. So that would leave Kentucky and Delaware as the 2 loyal slave states. And with Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, they, of course, had to give up slavery, too.
I have a question about the other side of the Potomac during this period. What was going on in Virginia, in Alexandria? Was it very stable and there was lack of concern on Washingtonians' part, or was that a big deal
They were really worried. Virginia seceded April 20, 1861, in the middle of the siege. Lincoln calls it a siege, by the way. That's his word. In the middle of the siege, Virginia seceded. And the 23rd, Robert E. Lee resigned and offered his talents to the Confederacy. And yes, people were worried. For example, just a minute, I just thought of another anecdote. Okay, you could see Mary Henry, the daughter of Joseph Henry of the Smithsonian Institution. She climbed the Smithsonian Tower. I did that once myself many years ago. And she could see Confederate flags on the opposite riverbank. Yeah.
Who controlled the bridges?
Well, they put Union soldiers on the Union edge of the bridges. So the bridges were under Union control. The Long Bridge and the other bridges leading into Washington. They had what few soldiers they could spare.
Hi, I've enjoyed this. I'm Loretta Newman. I'm the past co-founder and past president of the Alliance to Preserve the Civil War Defenses of Washington, and also a member of AOI. And I only say that because my concern, my Civil War interest, is in the end of the Civil War here, as far as D.C. is concerned anyway, the Battle of Fort Stevens, which of course was the only battle that was fought in D.C., and the only time a sitting president, Lincoln, has come under direct enemy fire during a battle. He stood up at the parapet and got shot at. He didn't get hit, but the guy next to him did. I'm just curious about what you're saying about the beginning of it, and I'm concerned or interested in what you'd have to say, the part I care about, the end of it. And I'm hoping, because this July 13th will be the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Fort Stevens commemoration we will be having at Fort Stevens. And we have an author's table, and I'm helping to arrange it, and I would be interested in having you there to, again, say what happened at the beginning.
I'll give my phone number or email before I go.
Or email or whatever, because I think both ends are extremely important.
Okay. Well, all right, I'll comment on that. And I also have one more anecdote I wish to mention before I forget, about a slave woman named Ula. I'll get to her in just a minute. Now, I mentioned how during the siege, until the reinforcements arrived, there were very few soldiers in the city, and the South could have taken it. Well, during the Battle of Fort Stevens, the same thing very nearly happened. When General Grant was placed in charge of the army, he took all the soldiers most of the soldiers out of the forts around Washington. He felt they weren't doing any good there, and he wanted them in battle. Well, they went in battle all right, but General Early saw what had happened, and he advanced on Washington. And General Grant, let's see, but Monocacy, the Battle of Monocacy, slowed Early down. I forget who commanded the Union Army. Do you even know who it was? Monocacy? Lew Wallace, of course. Ben-Hur, right, got it. Right. And that so Early was late, as somebody phrased it, and Grant managed to get the soldiers back into the forts around Washington just in time. Whether he took them out again or not after the battle, I don't know. But it was really foolish to leave the city undefended. Yeah. Now about Ula. Ula was a slave woman, and she saw that comet I mentioned, Thatcher's Comet. Now, there was a girl named Julia Nelson. Her father was Horatio Nelson. Horatio Nelson whatever, I forgot the name again. Anyway, Julia Nelson, she played with the Lincoln children, Tad and Willie. And they also were acquainted with a slave woman named Ula. And Ula said that the comet was a sword. And Lincoln would take that sword and cut the heart out of the South, but that he would die in office. A prediction which of course, came true. The children told Lincoln about that, except for the part about dying in office. Yeah. Oh, and Willie and Tad built a log fort on the roof of the White House. And they had a log pretend to be a cannon, and a condemned rifle that wouldn't work. And they said that was their fort. And Tad said, "Let them come. Willie and I are ready for them." One last question in the back? Horatio Nelson Taft and Julia Taft. That was it.
What happened between April and the first Battle of Manassas, Bull Run?
I really don't know the answer to that one. They had more soldiers were pouring into Washington over the next few days. I'm afraid I really couldn't say for sure about the remaining 2 months. They must have found barracks for them somewhere because there's no more room left in the Capitol. And they had a full-size army ready by the time Manassas rolled around. I'm afraid I couldn't really answer that.
Hey, did I miss? Did I see one last hand over here? No, I think we got them all. All right, to be continued maybe at Fort Stevens Day as we go. Well, thank you so much. And on behalf of AOI, I would like to present you a certificate of appreciation that we have, as well as our coin. We have an AOI coin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And in addition, our AOI bookmark. So I have been passing these out. If you did not get one, let me know. We'll get one. But you have one, and it will go really well in one of John's books. So if you would like to take that, all goodie bags for you. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. Have a wonderful weekend. Come see us at Hyrick House Museum in the Garden on Sunday from 12 to 3 if you're in the area and trying to avoid the mall and the Formula One race car. Come see us, or go to Kensington to hear some more book talks. Get out and come back in May. We would love to see you. Thank you so much for coming today.